The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
According to the Lord.
Immediately after feeding the crowd with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning, Jesus came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord. Today's first reading is a very beautiful, powerful, and yet simple reading. The prophet Elijah, that great 9th century BC voice of God in the midst of a whole generation turned against God, who's very discouraged because from the king on down, people are seeking his life, who goes out and hides under a tree in the desert and just wants to sleep, who is awakened by a messenger from the Lord, "Get up, eat, and drink," and then told to walk 40 days and 40 nights south to Mount Horeb. We know it perhaps better as Mount Sinai. And there he is to encounter God. So after that journey he goes, he finds a cave, and he spends the night there. And then he hears the voice of the Lord God. "Go out, stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And what does he hear? Things that normally would be associated with the divine epiphany. A great wind so strong it was splitting the mountains, breaking rocks in pieces. But the Lord was not in that wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a sheer silence. And what does Elijah do when he hears it? He wraps his face in his mantle. And he goes out and stands at the entrance of the cave, because he recognizes in that stillness and in that silence, the Lord is speaking to him. Our gospel has a similarly beautiful passage, one that has kind of a bit of a personal meaning for me. There is a shop in Cologne in Germany, just down the street from the beautiful Cathedral of Cologne. It is called Weinart's. Now, Mr. Weinart, who founded the shop, died about 11 years ago, but the shop is still there. Mr. Weinart was born in Berlin. When he was 17 years old, he went to a monastery, originally to train there as a metalsmith, but he decided to stay. He became a novice. He took vows. And then, when he was 19 years old, war broke out. And even though he was a monk, he had to leave, go and fight in the army. He survived through the war, came back, rejoined the monastery, and on a visit home to his parents, his right hand was blown off in an accident, something that had been left behind by the Russians. He went back briefly to the monastery, but was not able to stay there because he could not be ordained a priest, missing his right hand. And so he went out, and eventually he became a metal worker. And one of his, at least in my judgment, most beautiful pieces, one which I have, is inspired by this particular passage. Most of his works are in bronze or in enamel work. And you can almost tell them at a glance once you've seen some of it, because he was right-handed, and he had to work with his left hand. And so his faces are very angular, very distinctive way he created his faces and his figures. But he spent the rest of his life. Many beautiful pieces, smaller pieces that common folk like me could buy reproductions of, and beautiful pieces that are found in monasteries and churches across Europe and particularly across Germany. This particular piece, you see Peter walking on the water, and you see this look of horror in his face when he realizes that what he's doing and that the wind is there. And as he cries out, you see one hand from Jesus come and grab him. And I cannot help but think what was going through the mind of Mr. Weinart when he carved that particular one. And Jesus grabs on to Peter, and you don't see the whole thing, it's just a small piece, lifts him back into the boat. Take heart, it is I, the words that Jesus spoke to them. And to Peter in particular, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Sometimes we need to listen in the quiet places for the voice of God. And sometimes when things are too rough, we need to reach out, even if it's only with one hand, and wait for the other hand of Christ to come and to grab onto us and to bring us into safe waters.